Dad, we're gathered here today, and let me tell you how this idea came up. Daniel texted me one morning. I was having a cup of coffee and Devo, and he said, "Dad," I could just tell by the text he was saying it like this, "I got a great idea I want to run by you!" Exclamation point. And I wait throughout the whole day. What is it? What is it? I'm expecting a call any minute. So the next day we finally talk, and he says, "Dad, we got to get the Harper men together. We got to talk to Papa John." And I said, "Well, Daniel, where'd this come from?" So Daniel, why don't you tell about where did the idea come from?
I've just been thinking about the idea of legacy. Reading a book, just about building what family values are, and part of that is kind of knowing what's built up to that point. Like what lessons did my grandfather learn that have been able to pass down to me, and why I am the way I am. Why did you father my dad a certain way, and then him carrying on those things, and where's that deep foundation coming from? So that's kind of the idea. So just an appreciation of our history, and just the reasons behind who I am, and then also just who we are and who my sons are going to be because of what we've generationally learned from the Lord, and through He's kind of taught us and brought us through these experiences, and the wars, depression, jobs, conversations that have formed us, which are so powerful. So that's kind of the hope behind it.
And so this is a kind of a building block of hearing Papa John's story. So Daniel and I came over here on May the 14th and took Papa John to lunch, and we thought it would be good. But after we heard it, we said, "This is unbelievable. These stories are so powerful." It's just to hear Papa John say these things. So we tried recording it there in the cafeteria, and it didn't come off that well. So we're here today for that. So Dad, do you want to start from the very beginning?
Yeah. Well, I want to start with Mama and Daddy.
Oh yeah, there you go.
And it's Ben and Pearl Harper Sr., Benjamin Gerald Harper. And Daddy, Mother died at his birth. And Daddy grew up in a family of adult children because his daddy had been married and had an adult family when his wife died, and he married Daddy's mother, and she died at his birth. So Daddy married again, and Daddy always referred to it as the bachelor moment. That was her last name before she married Daddy's daddy.
And what year was that, Daddy, that he was born?
Daddy was born in 1889.
This is Benjamin.
Yeah.
Ben, and Mother was born in 1890.
That's perfect.
But the story of Daddy so much is so unique in that he was about 12 children, and they lived on the farm, and his job was, as a child, was to get up and help get the animals ready, because that was their motive of work. And you fed your animals before you sat down for breakfast, or do anything for yourself. Because without the animals, there was no gardening, no farming. And they only went to school 4 months out of the year. And that was after everything was laid back and things. And he had very little formal education, yet when he was in his late 50s and 60s, he went to night school at night and got a law degree. And with both daughters back home with their babies because their husbands were off at the war. So he was raising not the family, but their children too there for a while. And, but his life, they didn't have bridges and roads like we did. And he courted mother on a horse and buggy. And he went to see mother in Huntsville. And her daddy was sitting down reading the paper. And daddy was a traveling salesman, which was not a livelihood that was well respected back then. You know, that was a man just moved around, you know. He wasn't a steady person. So like the used car salesman sometimes have. And mother grew up in the Baptist church with 4 brothers. Her brother's mother died and he remarried and had mother and 3 sisters and a boy. And when daddy came in to meet mother for the first time, mother brought him into the parlor and said, "Daddy, this is Mr. Harper." And she said, "Daddy never looked up." Well, Daddy said he never looked up, said, "Hello, Parker."
Oh, Mr. Parker, yeah.
And then he thought about right, and I never looked up, never shook his hand. And, you know, I know she's got better sense to date somebody like this, you know, attitude. But he talked about going to school was a great thing. His whole life encouraged me about reading and go to the library and study. There's so much information to learn, but I didn't listen much. And my interest was sports and having a big time, you know. I wish I'd have listened to him more. But they would have a school bucket for their lunch, a pail bucket, and they'd make hoe cakes. And they'd give them 2 hoe cakes and a snuff can, because all the ladies had snuff back then, of honey. And he said, a lot of times I didn't make it to school. I'd punch that honey and I'd eat my hoe cake on the way to school, because they had to walk, you know, and if the creeks were up, they had to wade through the creeks and all that. But it's just unimaginable to me, the lifestyle that he went through is what we'd call elementary school, you know.
Yeah.
But he never did have high school and all that education. Went through 2 world wars, and then the Second World War, he was a assistant detective or policeman. They'd swear him in that he'd go out with them because the men were gone in the war, and so we had to have black drapes over the house and everything, and he did a lot of volunteer work for the police force, and during that Second World War time.
Well, black drapes, was that just to protect?
For I think the word about bombers
Yeah,
coming
they
over
didn't
and
want to
stuff.
have any light, and of course we never had that. But you wanted to be prepared for it, because we had nothing when the war started. And all the automobile plants converted to tanks and airplanes.
Going back, let's go back to, when did they live in Birmingham?
Okay. Daddy had Helen, Ben, Eleanor, and Marion in Birmingham. I was the 5th child. But the Depression, they had the home and had rental property, had a Buick automobile, and the Depression, he lost his job, all his property, and had no job with 4 kids. But mother's family, and I'll go to mother in a minute, she was a Dilworth in Huntsville. And her half-brother had a lumber yard, and the brothers, there was Albert, let me see, Will, Albert, and Manley were her half brothers. And they had the lumber yard, so they gave Daddy a job unloading boxcars there at the lumber yard. And we lived in a house in Huntsville with another half brother. And that's where I was born. Mother was 41 or 42 when I was born. So my parents were not young. I grew up as older parents. And she never worked, mother never worked. She never did have an outside job. She raised and cooked and cooked and cooked. I mean, every meal she'd get up in the morning, fix sausage, eggs, biscuits, pancakes, all of it full. And then Ben and the family would come home for lunch. And then she'd have a big meal at night. Then that was her life. And she loved cooking.
Now, how old were y'all when y'all came from Huntsville to Decatur?
In 1935, I was 4. And see, Helen was 16, and Ben was 13, and Eleanor was 10, and Marion was 3 years older than I was, so she'd be 8. And we had a rental house when we first came to Decatur, and that was Daddy's first job he had other than the lumberyard work since the Depression. And he was making like $250 to $300 a month and raising 5 kids. But bread, I can remember, would come, Highland Bakery would bring bread on a horse-drawn truck. This is in Decatur now.
Wow.
And the loaf of bread was a dime. They'd deliver it to your door for a dime. And one day I was out there on the porch with Mama, and he said, Miss Harper, we're gonna raise bread to 11 cents. You're gonna price it out of the market then. We're not gonna pay that kind of money for a loaf of bread. I mean, I was shocked. I mean, a penny, and delivered to your door, you know, even as a child, I thought, Mama, you tough on him.
I guess they didn't milk the same way, didn't they?
Oh yeah, delivered corn and milk, and had cream like that, you know, before homogenized. And our dairyman had to go out of business because he didn't have all the equipment to milk. He just had the cows. And they would, oh man, it was, you could make that homemade ice cream, all that cream. And of course, they didn't live long there.
Now, Dad, what about now? And then, what about tell about the church? Because grandmother Pearl, she was grew up Baptist.
Yeah, she was a little girl in the Baptist church, marrying this traveling salesman, which was not accepted well at all. And but Daddy, he was warm, and he knew how to win people over.
But he didn't want to join the Baptist church, right?
No, he said, my life, mean as I've been, said, I know he'll hold me on the water too long. he laughed about it, you know. But he was, I don't know what his reason for the Baptist church was or not, but he was always a devout Methodist and taught Sunday school lots. And he shared the Sunday school class with another man, and he'd come home when the other man was teaching. And Daddy says, he talks about his children and grandchildren so much. I wish he'd just get to the lesson. but then when he'd teach, he'd do the same thing. It was okay for him, but that other fellow was just taking too much time.
Yeah.
But Daddy loved to tease people. And of course, we had to have the minister over for lunch a lot, and Daddy, every time he would tease the preacher about us. He said, be careful now, says the kids will reach for the food quick. if you want anything, he said, go for it, quick. Mother said, no, Daddy, the preacher's here. And she never caught on to Daddy's teasing. She always took it serious, and she never did.
Well, she used to tell us, now you know your granddaddy likes to tease. She'd always had to explain what he was doing.
Yeah,
Right,
he'd call me. And David your daddy loved corn on the cob. And Daddy called them nubbins. And he'd call me and say, John, I got some nubbins for David. And David would get over and he'd eat that corn and he'd twirl it like that. Tickled Daddy to death. David was enjoying that corn on the cob. But I got ahead of myself.
all right, keep going, Dan.
But, let me see. Pearl had 3 half-brothers, Will, Albert, and Manley. And she had 2 sisters and 1 brother. It was Jenny, Zora, and George. And most of them had to have 2 names back then, but I can't remember the other name.
Okay.
George was George David.
Okay.
And he got killed in an automobile accident when he was about 28.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Clemmy Lou and Phyllis's daddy
Uh-huh.
that you've known
Uh-huh.
through the years. And Mother always, sometimes when I would come in as a teenager, she'd get tears in her eyes and says, you just look like George David.
Uh-huh.
But Jenny was the youngest, then Mother was the oldest, then Zora, then Jenny, and then George was the baby. And Jenny was Jenny Holder and Charlie Holder. And they had 2 girls, Mary Ann, redheaded, remember you met her, and Betty Jean. Betty Jean, during the Second World War, married a soldier. And he went off and came back, and the marriage didn't go well, and she wanted a divorce. He didn't want a divorce. And she was downtown Huntsville, and he came to the car and shot and killed her. And Uncle Charlie and Jenny, like to never got over that. They would go to the grave almost daily there for months and months and months because they were so hurt with her death like that. And of course, they had no children, Betty Jean, but Mary Ann had a bunch of boys. You met some of them.
Yeah. So, Dad, continue on with Pearl's family, and then I want to hear more about like your brothers and sisters later when you get to it.
Okay. Well, Jenny was the youngest daughter, and we visited a lot each other, and our visits were just staying at the house cooking, and she cooked on a wooden stove, and she could bake and do everything just on that, putting little wood in that stove. Didn't have electrical appliances. We had an ice box ourselves in Decatur until we got a 6-foot refrigerator. And Betty, when we got a refrigerator, I mean, we were up. Yeah, I mean, we were climbing. I went in there, hugged it, stood by it, and I said, Daddy, I'm 6 feet tall. You said this was 6 foot, right? He said, no, that's the interior 6 feet, inside. But a 6-foot refrigerator, you couldn't put much in that,
Yeah.
But you'd go to the store often and cook for that day, But now back to Mama's that's Jenny Holder and the 2 girls. And Zora had a girl and 1 boy. Obed Jr., remember him?
Yeah, I remember Opie.
He was paralyzed. He had a back surgery and was paralyzed for his last 30 years from the waist down. And Doris, his sister, she worked in the Baptist church her whole life and never married and died before Obed did. Zora's husband was Obed. He was a railroad man. And a railroad man back then, that was the job almost. Railroads were the prevalent line of transportation, everything. And a railroad man was highly respected, and there's so many jobs connected with it. But he ran a railroad station. He'd come in, you know, he's a ticket agent at a station. But I had never ridden a train until I was about 12 years old, and I got to ride a train from Huntsville to Birmingham, I think, one time. And man, I have done something. Get to ride a train. And at church, men that were railroad would always have a vest with that, and they'd have those big pocket watches, and it was excellent timing. We got 10 minutes before church starts. You know, everybody put out their watch, and just like it was a status almost to have a railroad watch. Everybody knew I'm working for the railroad, because they didn't have wristwatches back then. Everybody had the vest that, and then that's Zora and Obed. Now all these people are deceased now.
Figured there would be that.
And George, the young man that died in his accident, had two girls, Clemmy Lou and Phyllis Ann. And Phyllis is the only one alive. She and I are the only ones alive now from that generation. And she's Tommy and Phyllis Briscoe. And she adopted a child. They tried to have children for 5 or 6 years, and she adopted the child. Daddy did the adoption papers for her, and then she got pregnant almost as soon as she got the child. So
isn't that something?
Two children almost the same age.
Now, was she the one who had Luther? Who was, you know, Luther was my age. Somebody, was that Ovid? Was that Phyllis's son? Remember Luther? Okay.
That could have been Ovid's son that worked at Redstone Arsenal.
I don't know. Okay.
I can't remember Luther though.
Okay.
But then Ben and Pearl's children Helen was the oldest, and Helen was married 3 times. Her first husband, Jack Burton, and Joanne and Jimmy carried his name. But Jack was a irresponsible, grown-up kid. Helen came back from Huntsville at 19 and never dated, never been out. And Jack was late 29s or 30, took her out to eat, romanced her. And my parents says, you know, honey, you don't want to marry somebody that much older, you know. But she did. They ran off and got married. And he never supported them. He built a home out of his parents' farm without a bathroom. And this was in the, I guess, early 40s. And Daddy said, Jack, she's pregnant. She's got to have a bathroom in the house. She can't. No, all of our family's gone outhouses. So Jack didn't get it off right from the very first. And Daddy would get mad and cuss sometime about Jack. She said, Ben, you don't talk that way in front of the children. But he was so pent up with the way Jack was just irresponsible. But Daddy got the bathroom put in the house. But it just was a bad marriage. Then she went ahead and married Julian. You met Julian, and he committed suicide.
Yeah.
And then she married Miriam, a man named Miriam, and he died of cancer. So Helen outlived 3 husbands.
Yeah.
She lived to be 90 something. And Joanne lives in D.C. with a college professor, and Jimmy is what we would call the weird child of the whole clan. He says he's a Christian. I said, well, Jimmy, if you're a Christian, Christ doesn't need all these other religions hanging with you. He believed in the Eastern cultures and all that. I said, that's totally, you're demeaning Christ when you say things like that. But I've never been able to reach him. And he remarried. Jimmy and his wife divorced. He remarried. And now he's with his first wife and remarried more than his present wife. I mean, it's a messed up situation. And then Ben Harper Jr., we called him BG, Benjamin Gerald, BG Harper Jr. And I was in the 2nd or 3rd grade, and we're writing thank you notes for Christmas present. And Ben had given me roller skates. I mean, that was my Christmas that year. And Ben was working, and he bought me, and he was a great brother.
How much older is he?
They're about 13.
13 years older.
Yeah. And I got raised my hand. I said, how you spell BG? Everybody in the class, I was always a smart student. And I never forget it. Everybody giggled, laugh. Says, BG. Well, is it an initial? I said, I guess it is. But I wrote him a nice thank you note for those roller skates. But now Ben had Tommy Harper, the oldest, and y'all met him.
Yeah.
And John Wallace, who now wants to be called Jack for some reason.
Yeah.
Tommy's been in the union, I guess, fighting union business.
Well, he's a lawyer, so it's what do you call it?
But
Labor relations attorney.
Yeah, he would help people that unions trying to organize businesses. He would be an attorney to squelch that, and he grew all over the United States. And John Wallace was a policeman in Marietta and got shot in the face one time with buckshot, arresting somebody. But he's always been he was in the police business in Florida. He married a girl on the force and they got divorced, and he's with a precious friend of 20 years that he's never married. But we met him and her at that thing too. And I think John Wallace only had the one child, and Tommy has.
And there's Andrew that we met, Andrew Harper.
And
lives down in
then
Tracy.
two other daughters. One has a disability.
Yeah.
But the other is a beautiful girl. Then Eleanor married Lamar Mowell, who was a Baptist. His daddy was a Baptist priest and a postman. And Lamar was a very devout Baptist, but went off to war and came home shell shocked, I guess is the word they used back then, that he was in Italy doing a lot of bum raids and things, and he couldn't talk. He in the hospital when he came back to the States, and Carol Ann, their first child, was born while he was overseas, and she was about a year and a half when he saw her, and he started talking when he saw his little girl.
Oh, isn't that something?
And but he always had a difficult time adjusting what he wanted to do, and we always felt it was a result of the war, the effects the war had on him. And a lot of they didn't diagnose as they do now the various symptoms. He was shell shocked, you know. He had a mental problem in the war, and they didn't know how to treat it and all then. And she had Carol Ann and then Brenda. And Brenda came home from high school one day, and her daddy was in the bathroom. He had shot himself. Mm-hmm. He had been to hospital, and they told him he had cancer of the brain. It would not get better, and he just didn't want to have the burden on the family, I guess. And then Eleanor remarried Bill Grimes, the doctor. And they were married 40 some odd years. Bill lived in his 90s, and Eleanor did too. And Carol Ann had a son and a daughter, and Brenda has had several children. One was John, and her husband died young. He was a Marine, and I can't remember what.
Roger is his name, Roger Highsmith.
Roger Highsmith, yeah. And then Marion had two girls and a boy, Judy, Kathy, and Jeff. Jeff's the youngest, teaching in Florida on psychology or something. And Kathy married, and her husband fell dead. Same week her mother died. Mm. And Kathy has never remarried, and she adopted a child, and it's just been great for her and the child both. And Judy died of illness about 3 years ago.
Mm. And Marion's the number 4
right.
in the 5 line, right?
She was 3 years older than I was. And Marion died of cancer. Elma and Helen died of old age. And then you know the Harper, John David Harper and Sally's family. But I wanted to have something on the record about Sally. Sally, I was in college, and on Thanksgiving, I said, and her mother was wanting Sally to go out west. She knew we were getting serious, and they wanted me to finish college, you know, and do everything right. But my mind was, I knew I was going to go into the ROTC, and I'd have to go to Korea, and I didn't want to go over there and come back and not have Sally.
Is that because of the draft that was going on, right?
Yeah, and either I could be drafted or stay in ROTC. So I chose ROTC. And so I said, you know, we need to think about marriage. You know, we love each other. She says, well, we're too young, Johnny. This is Thanksgiving. But she was one of 6, and she was really taking care of the 6 children. Because she was the oldest. Steve had some mental problems himself. He just was not reliable. Her mother worked, her daddy was working. So my grammar school principal later went to school where Sally was attending, and I would go see my principal to get advice, and I told her I was in love with Sally first, and she says, well, you can't do better than that. I said, she's the sweetest. She's been taking care of that family for years.
Because Papa was a colonel in the Signal Corps. Was he over in Korea?
Yeah.
And in World War II, too.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
What's the Signal Corps?
It's like they had most of the communications through telegraph back in that, or in radio and stuff. So he had to help organize all that.
But when he would teach or preach, he would always get on the subject of his communications. Invariably, and we'd say, talk to him about it. He said, well, they need to know what I did. But he was so proud of all the messages they said. But back to Sally. So at Christmas time, I said, have you thought about it? And I said, I think we ought to go ahead and get married this summer. And she said, okay. So I worked at and see, I didn't have a car, didn't have a job, didn't have any money, didn't have anything.
Because you were a sophomore in college at this point?
Yeah.
At Presbyterian College?
Yeah, on a football scholarship. I tried to get Sally fed, and the coach told me, I didn't give your wife a scholarship, Johnny. So you wait till you graduate and then get married.
Now, Daddy, can you also back up and tell about when Granddaddy Harper took you up there to Presbyterian College the first time?
Yeah. We always went up 2 weeks before, to work out. You had 2 weeks you could legally work out. So he took me and my neighbor Frank Crawford. We both had scholarships up there, and we were looking where to go. We didn't know. There's only 600 students back then, and tuition was $800 a year, room, board, and everything. Now I think it's $60,000 a year or something. But anyhow, we walked into the gym and wanted to know where to go, and Bozo Ware, one of our largest linemen, and a veteran. See, we had a lot of veterans coming back. We had the teenage squad and the 25, 26-year-old veterans trying to get an education, trying to get back. And they were on the GI Bill, and they could get paid, in addition, $21 a month. I mean, that was big money back then. So Bozo was in there with his, no shirt on, hair and shaved, looked like a gorilla. And we spoke to him, and where do we go? And they told me what to do and where to go. And so Daddy spent the night that night. So the next morning, we met him, and he had breakfast with him. He said, Johnny, you don't have to stay if you don't want to.
Worried about you being so young in comparison to that lineman, how big and manly he was.
In his mind, they're going to chew you up alive. So I told, well, I can outrun him, Daddy. I said, he's on my side. But they came to a lot of games that I played in. Back then, the freshmen could play, but you played both ways. And when they called out my name on kickoff, I thought, I've been promoted to first string, But I realized that was the death squad. You get on the kickoff, run you down there, you get wiped out.
Can you tell us a little bit about one of the games against Clemson, where you played against Clemson?
Well, Clemson was a money-making game, and well, the first game of the year for Clemson and us, we always played there, and they would run this crew out around the whole field, and we'd bring out about 35 kids on our side, And we'd always lose one or two players because they just had more manpower, more better athletes. But we had a quarterback that would throw a little short pass to me. The linebacker would be out here, and I'd just cut in front of him and made the pass be 5 or 6 yards. But then everybody would attack me, you know. So I got this. This isn't all this fun. I'd go back in the huddle. I was thinking, let's don't call that play. But I mean, and that was the main pass. I'd go down and then hook sometime. That wasn't bad. But when you button hook and catch it, then the halfback's behind you, and he just murder you, you know, that's lined up. But I didn't enjoy the Clemson games. But we played others and we would win. We played Davidson, the Citadel, and Furman, and Erskine, and Newberry. My last remembrance of my college career was against Newberry. That was always the last game of the year. And I went down for a deep pass, and it was right in my arms, so I was going to catch it and run on for a touchdown. But I turned too quick and dropped the ball. So my career and my image, you know, I remember about that more than I do about some of the good things I did.
So, Dad, I do want, can we go back to high school? Because you played 3 sports. I'd like us to kind of, for you to describe playing the 3 sports, in particular your pitching when you were a pitcher in baseball.
Well, Daddy and Ben always wanted me to stay with baseball. But baseball, you didn't get any scholarships on baseball, partial scholarship. But if you're going to get a scholarship, you had to play football. So I concentrated on football, but I enjoyed baseball as much as any. And I was a all-star pitcher, but I stepped on a bee in the backyard barefooted, and I was allergic to bees, and so that swelled up and I couldn't get my shoe on. So I didn't get to pitch in the All-Star game at Ponce de Leon Park.
Wow.
But Daddy and I was there with my ankles swollen, but they announced my name. And Daddy was proud that my name was announced as a starting pitcher there. And in college, they wanted me to go out for baseball. That one of my friends, Joe Weingartner, and I had played in baseball all our lives. And he told the coach, but the coach was my line coach in football. And he rode me, and I didn't want to play for him. And so I didn't play in college. But basketball game, you would laugh at the game we played. There was no pressure, you would dribble down the court, and 28, 29, 30 points a game was a pretty good game. If you got 6 points, I mean, you was almost high scorer. And we'd pass the ball around, then we'd lose the ball, then come back, you know. And but we went into some tournaments down in Savannah, and my coach told me, said, the coach told me he's not going to guard you. You're the weakest player on the team, and they're not going to guard. Well, I was thinking, well, at least my coach is not saying it. The other coaches say it. So sure enough, I'd guard, taking the ball down, I'd dribble down there, and I just dribbled right up to the basket. And I scored about 18 points, had my name in the paper. High score. So they never even tried to stop me. But we had some other good players.
High school.
Jim Umbright went on to Georgia on a scholarship basketball, and Lefty Thompson went on and to Georgia, but then he quit. He didn't. They came back and got a degree in Georgia State and coached most of his life. And I do this, getting way ahead, but Lefty was one of the finest men in sports. And a lot of kids would want to cuss and be tough, and he never was. He was, and his family was uplifting, and I just had a lot of admiration for him, and a good athlete, tremendous athlete.
Lefty Thompson?
Lefty Thompson. So his funeral, 12 years ago, I guess, I told Madge, I said, now Madge, we're going to see some beautiful Decatur girls. I said, you Gainesville girls are pretty, but I mean, those Decatur girls, I mean, they're awesome. She was a little bit nervous about it. So we got there, and the funeral went well. Jack Fleeg and Lefty were real close.
Okay.
And so I went, Dot and I was in grammar school together. She was my first grade sweetheart. We had a peanut little girl, and I went to see Dot, and she had gained about.
This Dot was Lefty's wife? Okay.
And she was not the pretty little girl as I remembered, And then her sister, which I thought was a beautiful girl, George Ann, was Marion's age. So I went to George Ann and said, George Ann, this is Johnny Harper, good to see you. I said, you remember me? She says, no. I said, well, you remember my sister, Marion? No. Turned around and walked off. So my experience with them, so as soon as we got back in the car, I said, Madge, they've changed a little bit, Doc. And she said, she's never been happy in her life. So my stories were not that good. But back to...
But you were talking about, I think this is when you were in college, sophomore year, you and Mom were getting ready to get married that summer.
Right.
Okay.
And so Sally went to, I went to work at the post office there and worked 8 days, every day, and got $300 to my name. So Daddy knew somebody could get a diamond ring, and so I bought a diamond ring for that $300, which probably would cost $1,500 or $2,000 today's market. But anyhow, I gave that ring took her to a drive-in, and had popcorn. And she said, I don't want any. And I said, well, reach in there. So she reached in, found the ring. That was my great romance. Had a drive-in or a popcorn thing to influence your bride to be. And then she went to work at the Atlanta Journal, dropped out of school to try to make things, made all the clothes and everything, And then we got married that June. And then went back to Presbyterian, and we went in to see the president because he was needing a new secretary. And here she was, 19 years old, no experience, but we had the courage or the lack of knowledge to go talk to the president of the college about a job. We wanted her to have a job, So he listened to us and thanked us for the interview and everything. And I look back on it, what he really thought when we were in there, I'll never know. He was in his 50s, you know, you'd hire somebody in the 30s or 40s or something. And, but she got a job at the bank making $98 a month. And I was getting $21 a month for ROTC. So we had more money, we knew what to do. Our rent was $25 a month. And it was in upstairs, but we had a fireplace for heat. So Daddy came through again, got us a little electric heater. And that's where David was born, when we were in that little upstairs apartment. And Sally's mother was overseas, so my mother came up to sort of help Sally for a few days after having the baby. And when David was the only baby in Hayes Hospital there in Clinton, South Carolina, and I went in and the nurse had grabbed both feet and turned him like that. And it looked rough to me. I said, be careful, you hurt him that way. She stopped, looked at me and said, son, how long you think I've been doing this? I mean, she just chewed me out good. But we had other friends in college that were veterans, had kids. And of course, this was January of my senior year when David was born. And one of the ladies that had a child, David had a cleft on his chin that as a baby it was more pronounced than it is now, you know. And she made the mistake of saying something about his chin to Sally. And when she left, Sally says, I'll never appreciate her again. To talk about my baby that way. Why in the world she would say, I said, Donna, he does have a clip. You didn't move when Sally took a position on her children. I mean, that was it. You couldn't do it. I would tease Cheryl, because Cheryl was a little difficult at times. And I'd make up stories about Cheryl tell Dan when they were courting, you know. And said, that is not so one bit, Dan says. She's always been the sweetest thing. You just couldn't say anything about it. But
it was means this PC. Didn't they have spiritual emphasis week?
They did. We had to take two years of Bible class, and we had some great Bible professors. And they had different people would come into the dormitory and would have religious institute week, and you'd sit on the dormitory steps, and they would come in and talk, and we'd pray and read scripture and things. And I grew up in the Methodist church, sort of fire and brimstone. But if you don't do the right thing, God doesn't love you. I missed the whole concept of what Jesus has done for us. It just wasn't preached about salvation. It was, you better be right. You better stay, you know. And that was my religious experience. And so I went off to college not knowing really about Jesus. And they would, in the classes and things, but still it didn't grasp me. But in the religious emphasis week one, and I guess it could have been my freshman or sophomore year, I can't remember for sure. But this colonel who was giving the counseling or lesson, or sermon, whatever conversation we were having, was saying that, you know, he grew up, felt like he could do everything himself. he didn't need anybody to help him because he felt like he'd made he told his life story, but then talked about the war and how he realized he needed somebody else. And he said, accepting Jesus changed my whole life outlook. And that just spoke to me. I mean, that's so real, you know, for the first time that I felt like, well, why hadn't I thought about it like that, you know? So it really, I pledged to accept Jesus, and I wanted to walk Jesus' path with him. And it helped me tremendously, but I never was the Christian I wanted to be. And, but Sally helped me so much in that, and her illness just brought me closer and closer. And I just felt like when Sally died, she was running into Jesus' arms. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a peaceful time. David was there with us, and Cheryl was pregnant with Sally. And Dan was there.
Well, Kim was there too, wasn't she?
Kim was there.
Yeah.
We had all said that the hospital we went up at was to get her built up because she couldn't take any more chemo. And we felt if she could get built up, she could, but she couldn't. And he had told us that this doctor in Indiana is going to let you go back. And so I said, well, you let me go back to die at home, aren't you? He said, no. Said, you can't. They can do things for you still. But she never believed it. And she wasn't strong enough to fly, so he said, we're going to put her into the hospital. And so when we put her into the hospital, the nurse came to me and says, are you going to have on any life-sustaining things? And we both agreed no. I said, well, you need to get in touch with your family. So I called, and the kids flew up, and Sally was saying, well, get my hair fixed, Johnny, get my hair. Because, you know, she lost a lot of hair, mm-hmm. and she wanted to look good for the children coming up.
Yeah.
And, but she just had a quiet, peaceful time, and the chaplain there with us told us, now the hospital is going to try to treat, just like, you know, that's their job, is to give they may want to do more x-rays and all that, and so he said, you're going to make the decision. And so somebody came in, wanted to take an out for x-rays, and David says no. And so we stayed there, and the doctors Dan and the doctors had met and told us that none of the organs were functioning properly. The cancer had just taken over. And she had survived about 18 months, but she just couldn't take it. But she, going back to her style of life was always so positive, and all the friends, I mean, they all loved Sally especially, and different ones would say, she just makes you feel good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So she was something. But that's about the history that I can think of.
All right,
I got a couple questions.
Okay.
One, I want to hear about your childhood. What it was like growing up. Two, I want to understand more of the dynamic between you and your in-laws, and then Sally. Or Sally Mama to us, and your parents, and then just what it was like during when you were having your kids, and then what it was like seeing them off to college, and then us.
All right, that gives me a lot of ammunition. But coming back to Decatur, we had went to grammar school at in the first grade. Then we moved to a home on Greenwood Place in Decatur, a 50-foot wide lot, and had a garage at the back then. The street behind us wasn't paved. And so Daddy, being a farmer, and then limited income, because income didn't pick up until the Second World War started. And so we had a chicken coop in the garage, had laying hens. Then we had a garden on one side, and of course the chickens could come out into had a fenced in where the chickens could come. And then Daddy built a cage to have fryers. He'd buy the little bitties, feed them, and then fry them. And my job as 8 or 9 years old would help plucking the chickens, put them in hot water, pluck them. Mother would cut them, and she'd check that chicken. We'd do it all in the morning, and she'd have chicken for supper. And but I always wanted a job because money was such a scarce thing, and anything I could do would be helping the family. And I worked at the drugstore carrying groceries home for people, because a person coming in the grocery store, they would get it bagged, and then we'd take it. Everything was a walking distance, and Brown's Groceries. And then, of course, the war came, and we had food stamps. You'd get stamps based on the size of your family. And, of course, the food was going to service people. And we had chickens. You could get chickens cut up for, I'm gonna say, maybe $1, but you could get live chickens 2 for a quarter. So I'd get chickens there till I always got big enough to eat, and go home, fix them. But groceries, the home we bought was $4,300. 3-bedroom, brick, bath and a half. And Daddy worked hard to get that paid off. And but then I worked at the drugstore when I was a little older, and for 35 cents an hour. But I had to work on the weekend mainly. And Mother would excuse me for working on Sundays. Says, "Ox in the ditch, son, I understand." Said, you can work. And but it nothing would open to after church hours. So at 1 o'clock I'd go to work to 10. So that's 9 hours, 35 cents.
Wow.
I was rich. And I worked there about 3 years on the weekend and things, at Little Dock and Big Dock. Both of them were veterans of the Second World War. And Big Dock got shot so much. He was an infantry officer, and his hands, couldn't get his hands right. And but they were pharmacists and worked hard their whole life. But he called me back one time. I mopped the floor, cleaned behind the fountain soda jar. We made all the drinks, you know. And Coca-Cola, you'd squirt Coca-Cola, then put the
Carbonated water.
carbonated water in it to make a Coke, and root beer floats, those kind of, and,
Did y'all have radio during that time
oh,
frame?
yeah.
So y'all
No.
listen to radio together at night?
Yeah,
as a
oh, yeah,
family?
didn't have TV. I took the position, there's no way you can ever have TV. How in the world are they gonna get pictures in that radio? I was convinced it never happened. He called me back there, and I didn't know what he was gonna let me go or what. He said, "John, we're gonna raise you to 50 cents an hour." I said, I smiled and laughed. When does that start? He said, "It's gonna start next week." So I ran all the way home and told Mama, I said, "Mama, I've been promoted." 50 cents an hour. And, that was my dating money and everything. Ooh. Of course, I wasn't driving then, but I managed to spend it on something, I guess. But that was about my life, and then went out for sports, and we had the basketball squad was the rinky dinks until I got on the varsity, and then football was freshman football, and then we had a league. You had couldn't weigh over 125 pounds or something like that, and we'd play in pastures and everything else, and had no really formal fields to play in like they do now. But that's, any other questions about what I did?
I guess when you were, what year were you born again?
1931.
31. So you essentially felt all of the Great Depression.
Oh yeah.
When you were a kid. So what was it like? Just growing up around there, like what are some of the impacts that you saw and some of the things that I taught you?
Daddy would get us all around the table and talk about the expenses, because the income was so limited, and he'd say he never did like the doctors because medicine was so expensive and things. He said, "We're going to spend it on food to stay healthy instead of medicine to get well." I can remember him saying that. But everybody was just limited on income. And of course, we had one car, which was a company car. He had that was furnished for his traveling. But he traveled from 60 or 80 miles around Decatur. He didn't go out of the state. His territory was limited.
Was he selling? What was he selling at that point?
When he left Huntsville to come to Decatur, he was with Horn and Wilson Roofing and Plumbing, and so he sold that. And then Ben, I've left out a big part of the story of my youth. Ben, when he got out of the Marines, he wanted to get a business of his own, so he formed a roofing business and wanted Daddy to help him get the bigger jobs. And he sort of got at odds. He felt Daddy wasn't doing enough for him. And Daddy said, "Son, I can't promote these big jobs. You gotta have some background to get this kind of big job." So we did a lot of jobs. I put on some roofs myself on 2 little homes at Decatur. If we ever there, that's matched out. I'd love to show them to you. Now, I'd be scared to death to get on a roof. But Ben would give me jobs, and but he never did get his business right. And then his marriage did not go well, and they got a divorce. And then he just sort of lost his health and will there for a number of years. But Tommy brought him back, and he did well, but his health by then was so poor. Oh, that's Madge out there now. All right, I did,
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
then,
So Dave, do you actually remember hearing like anything like the speech when Roosevelt, the Day of Infamy speech, and
Oh, yeah.
the
Oh,
War
yeah.
of Pearl Harbor and all that
oh
kind
yeah,
of stuff?
see, the radio was a family event after dinner. I mean, the radio was big, you know, and we'd get chairs like Earl said, we'd all be around that, just grass was everywhere. And Roosevelt did a marvelous job of talking periodically about the world situation. And of course, you'd get the war news on the radio every evening, but we had a favorite show, Dr. IQ. And this is when just Marion and I were there at home. And I guess I was 10 or 12, something like that. And Dr. IQ would ask questions, you know, and if you got the question right, you get a Milky Way candy bar. And they'd talk about advertising. This was a 30-minute program, and half of it was advertising Milky Way candy bar. And they'd talk about that nougat and that chocolate caramel there. We sit there. I said, Daddy, I run to the store. I said, we can get one of those big bars for a nickel. And we get a Milky Way candy bar that way. So he said, I don't know, Johnny. All along he wanted it too, you know. And so he'd give me a nickel, and I'd run all the way to the store back, and we'd divide it 4 ways. And man alive, that was the best tasting candy bar. And I look forward to that every night. It didn't happen every night, but it was frequent.
So I would just be interested in knowing, like, you know, both of y'all came from marriages that, you know, widower
Were very
widow,
good,
and
yes.
good marriages where you loved your spouse and thankful for that. And then how that, I'd like to hear about how y'all met and how you became to like that support for each other, and hey, let's do this together. Let's keep our life going together.
I'll start,
Okay.
start, and then you can sort of give. But Madge had been a widow for 3 years, and she had the 4 children, and they were all adults. Robert was the youngest at about what age?
Gosh, I can't remember, but he was young.
He was young. And you met the 2
I'm
daughters.
married.
And she has another son that's older. But we had friends wanting me to find somebody. I had friends, Madge wanted to find somebody. And she had picked out a couple that she wasn't that happy with, which I was real thankful for. I think they gave us some worms to begin with. But anyhow, she, Mary Dodd and George Dodd and Martha and Walter Bird were instrumental in getting us together.
And I went to high school with them.
Okay.
In
So I know.
Gainesville.
See, she was a freshman when our crowd was seniors, but she looked up to the older crowd as her heroes and things, you know. And Gainesville had a good program all along, but Decatur played Gainesville, and we were pretty well even. We won some, lost some in our history, but she needed an escort she was working at Bernal College, and she needed an escort for a big function, And Robert had been taking her there, but different functions, and so that's her youngest son. And so she called me one day, and she said, you know, we've been, people wanting us to meet, and I need an escort to this function. And I said, well, I would like to, Mary Dodd and George said, I ought to meet you. I said, I'd like to meet you. And I said, could I meet you before we go? and she says yes. And so I knocked on the door, and she was frightened as I was. You know, didn't want to, you know, she sat well with that, I sat well with here. And we were a little bit cool toward each other there. And we went out to eat. I took her to the nicest restaurants in Gainesville. Kim said, Daddy, quit taking Madge to Morrison's cafeteria.
I said I liked it, of course, you know.
So anyhow, we went to the function there.
The black tie dinner.
That went okay, but we still was not, no warmth. You know, we were complete strangers with each other. We were both a little bit uncomfortable, and so we went out to eat one night and came back. And of course, after eating, sometime I'd get sleepy, so I didn't want to get sleepy there, so I'd leave early. And I said, Madge, I hadn't hugged her, I hadn't held her hand or anything. I said, can I just have a little Christian hug before we go? And so we hugged each other, and that sort of broke the ice a little bit. So we
Kind of did me in.
yeah. So we got where we were seeing each other pretty regular there. And then I got serious about it. And she said, well, you know, Sammy hadn't been gone that long. Said, we need to think about it. We want to do the right thing. And said, let's just think about it, wait a while. And so I waited a while, then I'd bring the issue up again. And so finally in the spring, we said, let's go talk to the preacher. So we talked to her minister, and he said that,
Who was that at the time?
Dr.
John Lee Taylor.
John Lee Taylor, been to the Baptist
See, I was
church.
going to the Baptist church, and he was at the Methodist church.
And John Lee said, well, I want you to know, I've been praying for Madge for how many years that she'd find someone that would really love her. And I said, well, I really love her. He said, well, that's an answer to prayer. I said, I want to get married. And Madge is a little hesitant. And she said, well, it's best to wait a year after the death. And I said, okay. And so she sort of nodded agreement that she was going to go through with it. And September the 11th, the awful day, but that's our anniversary.
So, honey, you know, tell your part. Why don't you tell your perspective of all that?
Well, on my behalf, the reason I called him, which is not in my personality to be the one to call the man, I had a secretary at Burnell who said that the women were lining up outside John's door with casseroles. if I had an interest in him, then I might need to call him.
And I appreciate that lady. I told her what to say.
I had met Sally and Kim, but I had not met the rest of John's family. So that was special when he took me to meet you. Remember, he told me y'all didn't, his family didn't like animals in the house. And when I got to your house, you had a rabbit and a gerbil and a dog And I've forgotten, a parakeet, I think, I can't remember.
Yeah, that was over there in
But
that
I
on
thought,
Stilson Circle.
I'm really in for it. But I met all his family, and so we decided to go ahead and get married. It was really a God thing, a God's blessing, because we had both come from beautiful marriages, and that's what I think makes this marriage so beautiful, is that we were so happy, and we could talk freely about Charlie and about Sally, and with no hesitation or embarrassment. And I think that was a help to John, because he was really, I had been under counsel with my pastor for several years, and John was newly a widow. So he had more emotions right at the surface, say, than I did, and I understood that. And I think that's one thing that solidified our relationship.
Well, it helped me so much because I had tried to date some of Sally's friends, and I was uncomfortable from the very first. But I would take Madge out to eat, and I just couldn't, I wasn't comfortable yet. I just didn't feel right. And she would say, I thoroughly understand. Instead of having a feelings hurt, she was building me, helping me on every occasion. And it just meant so much that it was so wholesome that we could just, and I'd call her Sally occasionally, she'd call me Charlie occasionally at first.
And that was okay.
But we get the names right now pretty well.
And how y'all live in Gainesville
Yeah.
initially, and how long did y'all live in Gainesville before y'all went down to Tampa for a while?
Well,
Not long.
about a couple of years maybe,
No.
Not
Did
that
you
long.
think it was a couple of years?
Maybe less.
I don't think it was a couple of years. I think it was.
Well, we
Pretty soon.
started looking. She was in the condominium, and I had the house on Edgewater there, and we didn't need both, so we were looking to. We're going to put them both up for sale, and try to find another home. And Dave Vaughn, my college roommate and buddy through life, they lived in Florida, so
We went down to see them.
we went to visit them with not the idea of finding a home in Florida. We were looking for up here, and the homes up here we were looking at were very expensive, and we got those in Florida more of a home for less amount. So I said, would you be willing to move to Florida? I said, don't you like these homes with these lanais screens over the swimming pool and everything? It was just wonderful. And she said, well, I've traveled all my life. Charlie, he was in the service, and I moved around all over Europe and United States. So we bought a home that year, Dave Vaughn's home, on a handshake. The man had lost his wife, and he wanted to sell it, and we agreed to the price. We shook hands and closed the deal out and moved down. And we stayed down there about 4 years.
4 years. And I think it was a special move because all the different families, all 7 families, came to visit us like for a week at a time. So we had special one-on-one getting to know each other, because it was a difficult time.
Right, it's adjustment.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Kimmy always, it meant more to her because the age of her children. She said it's so nice to be welcome. Said we go into the restaurants, they look like, why do we want all these children in here, And the kids just love the pool, in the wintertime. We'd have the pool warm and the weather was nice. But
It was a good move.
It was, and we enjoyed it. And I decided I got down on my leg or something, and they couldn't find out what it was. And I thought it was my hip going to have to be replaced, but it was a fractured nerve on my spine, ruptured disc. And they found it here and fixed it here, and I hadn't had any problem. But
So we decided there were too many old folks in Florida. We needed to come
About
back
4
here where
years,
we
y'all,
knew the doctors.
because y'all, the time you were down there, you were involved in at the Methodist church down there?
Yes.
yeah,
We had a hard time finding a church. We visited and visited and visited. We visited Tex and Nancy's church, Baptist church, and several others. We visited one where the piano and the organ haven't gotten together yet. They were out of tune and out of sync. And when we went to have lunch, I was just crying. I said, John, I just can't take this.
Because Honey's always been musically involved, like playing the church organ or the piano.
So we went to a Bible study. We heard of a Bible study. We thought we would like it, Hyde Park Methodist in Tampa. So we went there and we met one of the chaplains, Bernie Leaving. I never will forget him. And he just hugged me. He said, well, if you're looking for a church, you found one now. And we did. We loved that Sunday school, and we loved that church and the pastor. Mm-hmm. And I was the sort of the assistant organist there. Mm-hmm. So that fulfilled my music. Mm-hmm.
And when did you start Bible Study Fellowship? Was that when y'all came back up here?
No, it was down there.
Down there you started.
Yeah.
And that really turned my life. I was always in Sunday school, always in Bible studies and everything. But this really touched me. It was in-depth Bible study. We would study one chapter of the Bible, or one book of the Bible, all year long.
Yeah, right.
So we had good, involved study. And John went too. He went to a men's group.
yeah. It was the best study that I've ever had. And when we got back, we didn't have one here, but it was great. You'd get it 3 times. And the teachers were just fabulous. And then you'd go into a small group like we have and discuss.
Now, I did go here. They had a women's
Yeah,
group.
well, you
in
became
Sugar
And
A
you
leader.
facilitated something too.
Yeah.
A leader.
yeah,
Yeah, and that was really meaningful in our lives together, I think.
yeah.
So
But
John's been a great help to me.
down at Tampa, they want to introduce you to the church. They want to be sure your faith before they let you join. So we had a meeting with a group, I guess 8 or 9 people, maybe 10, 12, about this is what the Methodist Church stands for. You believe in Christ. You don't ask the various questions, and we all know it. And then one of them said, well, we're so happy to have
Newlyweds.
a what?
Newlyweds.
Newlyweds. And so the group was looking, we didn't look like newlyweds. And so they pointed at us and they looked at us, are you kidding? Newlyweds at our age, But what was the preacher's name?
Jim Harnish.
Harnish. He wrote books and he was an excellent
We loved
pastor,
him.
a wonderful minister. And we had some great people in our Sunday school class that fell out with him because he didn't take the position about the Bible. That it's
That it was literal.
something and
Inerrant,
Without
maybe?
thought. Inerrant.
yeah, and
Thanks, David.
and they did. They left, and we loved them. But we had another man in there that painted a portrait of me that had believed.
It was of us, honey. It was you and me both.
Okay.
It was the worst portrait I've ever seen.
Worst portrait. But he was believed in, what's the word I'm looking for?
I think he was apocalyptic.
Apocalyptic.
I can't get it out.
Apocalyptic.
Yeah, he looked for the end times
End
to come
times.
today.
Yeah,
And that's what he studied. He spent his whole time.
And he would get on these things and say that, you know, that's what a helicopter is.
Yeah.
He'd take the scripture and
Yeah.
modernize it into this, you know, just blow my mind, but he was convinced
Yeah.
of all this.
Jesus was coming next week.
Yeah.
And we had one lady that came into our Sunday school class that, well, why do y'all say your Bible's better than anybody else's? And I had, in Sunday school, I never had anybody challenge like that. And so I said, well, we think it's the Christian Bible. What is your faith? And I don't remember how she answered, but she was not convinced our Bible was better than anybody else's. And so we had a group that we came in that one, we got there early, and they had the motorcycle paraphernalia wearing. You know, you could tell they're part of a motorcycle gang in my mind, and I was saying, well, I'm glad they're here. I wonder what they're going to look for in our policy. And turned out they were one of the most wonderful couple in the world. They had spent their whole life ministering at the beaches and setting and leading people to Christ, and had been financing three-wheelers and things in Africa. I mean, they were a Christian motorcycle group.
One was a lawyer and one was in real estate.
And they were the most impressive. And I was so ashamed of myself for letting that image that I perceived affect me. And I didn't ever tell them, but I really was ashamed. I judged on appearance instead of the heart.
So y'all moved back to Gainesville
After 4 years.
after 4 years, and then y'all.
And it was a good move. It was.
And y'all, that's when y'all lived right across the street, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at first, see, when we came back, we had everything in storage, and we were homeless and didn't have a home. And so Madge and Ray Birch had this lake home out East Hall, and let us stay there for
Several months.
till we could find a home. And we were looking up as far as what was the little place?
Cornelia.
Cornelia.
On Lake Russell.
And we
Up
were
the top of
thinking
the
about
mountain.
that, and I'm so glad we didn't. And we looked around, and we saw another little home we liked, but they had a swimming pool in the backyard. I said, we've had enough swimming pools, you know. They are a lot of trouble to have a pool in your backyard. So we didn't like it. And how did we find the one on Tommy Aaron?
I looked, I found it.
And that was near the home that she and Charlie had for those years. And so the children said, Mama, you think that's wise to be living there that close to? And Madge responds, darlings, you have to take life and move on. So we're forming our marriage, you know. And it was a good buy, and we enjoyed it there.
We loved that home.
And it had an upstairs master bedroom upstairs. Had one downstairs, but when we were selling it, the master wasn't on the main floor, and that was a problem in selling it. But the upstairs bathroom was as large as this whole area there, and I mean, it was just fabulous. And we missed that a little bit, but when Madge found this, a couple of the Sunday school class was interested in buying this. So we came over and looked at it, and having one floor and everything, we thought, man, this.
Well, the yard work was
Yes,
too
I
much.
got way I couldn't keep up with. I could get the grass cut, but all the rest of the yard, the shrubs, and everything else, I couldn't. I was getting worse and worse about it. So
I
this
have
has
to
been-
interject one little funny story, I think. Shortly after we got back from Florida, my youngest son Robert got married. He wasn't married when we got married. And at his rehearsal dinner, he got up and made his little speech, and he said, "I want to thank my mother for having me, and I want to thank my stepfather John for taking her off my hands." Also, like John had said, everything at Burnell that was formal or anything in Gainesville, I had to go. Robert escorted me, you know.
Yeah, right.
So he was glad to have somebody take over me.
Madge has left to go to the doctor's appointment and meet with the daughters, but Madge has been a great influence in my life from the standpoint of making the adjustment of a remarriage and faith in Jesus and building up the importance of having Jesus as your foundation. And she's been great at that. And she's been an inspiration to my family for the love she's shown them through various messages and things. And at the beginning, it wasn't that easy. She didn't know how to adjust to our family and our thinking. Her husband was a career soldier, Air Force pilot, and I didn't want anything to do with the Army. So there was some conflicts of interest there that we adjusted, and she's just been a great voice. But what she wanted me to, for a while ago, she was telling me, want to remember something. Oh, our wedding. We had my minister from the Methodist Church and her minister from the Baptist Church to marry us at the Baptist Church. And the sermon or the message was joining two families together. And we had children from both sides, and they were, some were just babies. Kathy, the daughter that came in a while ago, daughter was about maybe 2.5 or 3. Kim's children were young, and some of them thought it was just a party we were having. It wasn't anything to do with the wedding. We were going to have cake and a party. And so after the closing of the wedding, he said he just felt like one of the ministers, I don't know which one, said that Charlie and Sally looking down on blessing this union of bringing these families together. So instead of us leading out, little Elizabeth came down and grabbed Madge's hand and walked out with her to the party. And so that was our big wedding event.
We'll have to get a good picture of that. What else, Daniel?
What's some good stuff we're missing? I want just a little bit about from the time that you and Sally Mama got married, and then talking about staying back or not going to the Army or having children.
Yeah.
What it was like having your kids and raising them.
Well, okay.
And then your career a little bit too.
Yeah, okay. Well, we had to go into the Army. I graduated in 1 week and had to report to Fort Benning the next week. So we went down to Fort Benning with no place to live. We had to find government housing.
Because that's in Columbus, Georgia, isn't
In
it?
Columbus, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And David was 8 months old.
And one thing you said last time we met is you wanted to marry Sally quick enough before you went off to war because you
Right.
thought, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, in my mind, so many of the students there, each class that graduate would go into Korea, and we'd lose 1 or 2 a year. So I felt like, plus I was scared of Sally losing her, but I wanted to have somebody to think about and come back to. I was convinced in my mind there wasn't going to be any option. I was going to go to Benning and go to Korea. But the war was phasing out. See, I went in June, and in August they didn't sign the peace agreement. They never have signed the peace agreement yet. But it sort of fizzled out, and so not many were, the combat part was over. So the risk wasn't bad, but they kept sending people over. So after Benning, my orders was to Fort Bliss, Texas. And that's where Cheryl was born. And David was just months old.
El Paso, Texas.
Yeah, and we had find a home to live in there, and waiting to get on the government property because that was a better price for us and a nicer facility than living out in the city. But we had no home, and so we rented this place. And the lady, when she rented, it was nothing but sand in the yard. And she says, a little water will make that yard just be beautiful. I never forget. And I thought, yeah. Had linoleum floors and all that. But Martha and Walter Bird, he was stationed there too. And his job was playing baseball for Fort Bliss. And that's all he did, the entire service, while I was out in the field.
That was his job, to play baseball?
Yeah, that's it.
All right.
And he and Chaparrano toured all over the other bases out west to play baseball.
And what was your position in the Army?
I was second lieutenant.
And what were your activities?
Oh, I was in a replacement training center. Every 8 weeks, we'd get another group of 225 people from all over the country, and
Infantry.
and give them the basic training, firing all the weapons, crawling under the bears. They had a regular routine to get POR qualified, where they could go into combat, and we, fired every weapon, fired every cannon, bazookas and all that, and every weeks they would go, and then we'd get another group. So I got a lot of that over and over and over. That's why they're helping me now with my hearing aids, because they feel like it had an effect on me getting so much of that. Firing M1 is noisy, and I was on the firing line a lot, and then the machine guns, and then the cannons. You had to have all that too. But I had a Marine, ex-Marine graduate there that I was assigned to him the first time I was there, and we got along fine. But then they gave me a company. Marion Campbell, the coach for the Falcons, was the company commander that I took over his company from him.
Really?
And he was a moose of a man, I said, Lieutenant, I'm missing some bayonets. I said, how many? I said, 12. So you'll have them. So you have to sign millions of dollars of equipment each 8 weeks, So they would share and steal from each other to get out, to sign it out, then your record was clear. But I was nervous about all that signing up, and I was making, I think maybe $325 a month as a second lieutenant. And, but I don't know what the rent was back then, but anyhow, back to Martha and Walter, they were living in a place and had to wait to get on the court too, but their place was larger than where we were. So they invited us, come on, let's live together and share the expenses. So I said, that's great, because Walter and I grew up, and Sally knew Martha from GSCW. So there was a friendship there. Sally had met Martha in the government grocery store. What was it called? What are they? PX.
PX, that's right.
PX. And so we worked it out, and Martha was expecting her first child. But Walter was there, and David thought Walter was his daddy, because I'd be gone for a week at a time. Mm-hmm. And we lived there maybe 3 or 4 months. But I'd come in and David'd be in Walter's lap. It'd just break my heart. But Martha, she cooked dinner one time for us. And of course, pregnant, everything was good and tasty. And she had burnt the spaghetti. And we were eating it, you know. She said, Walter, this is so good. She said, I'm gonna save this for your lunch tomorrow. We was looking at each other, no. We tell this on her. The other thing we had, I was on the firing range, expert fireman, you know, rifle shooter and all the other weapons. And Walter was playing baseball. So I wanted to sort of show off my skills. We were out driving one day, and they had turkeys. You could shoot balloons and win a turkey. Well, I was thinking we'd get a live, not a live turkey, but a, you know, frozen turkey or something. So we stopped, and I shot and missed, and Walter shot and hit. So I didn't get to show off. He shot better than I did. And we wanted a turkey, and he said, well, you didn't hit the balloon. I said, we hit the stick that burst the balloon. We want a turkey. And so he gave us our turkey. And we got home. I said, Walter, you hold the neck out there, and I'll cut it with a knife. No, you hold it. Because the neck on turkey is about like that, but, you know.
Moving around?
Yeah, and so anyhow, I said, well, I just wring its neck. I said, I wring chicken's necks all my life, but a turkey's neck is something else. So I grabbed that thing by 2 hands, and I started wringing, pulled the head off. And he flew off about 30 yards in the backyard.
Kept going, kept running.
And so we had to catch it. But we got it, cleaned it, and did all that like we were used to.